There's a few things that we could talk about. There's, of course, the continued bombing of Kherson, Ukrainian buildings being lit ablaze in the city. There is scuffling in the Sumy region, drone attacks and such. The fighting in the Kupiansk area is still as vicious as ever. The Russians are throwing airstrikes and drone strikes on the right side of the Oskil River, and they're also bombing with drone units, drone attacks to the south of Kupiansk, where the frontline fighting for the city itself is currently ongoing. The situation for the Ukrainian soldiers to find themselves over the river is quite difficult due to the fact that transporting themselves over the river, over the line, back towards unoccupied Ukraine can come with some difficulty uh, due to the fact that many of the transport flotillas have been destroyed. But the big continuing update that we are still concentrating on is the situation in Pokrovsk. As you can see, about 80% of Pokrovsk, or maybe you could say 70% of Pokrovsk is gray zone. Uh, 20% of Pokrovsk is unoccupied, and 10% of Pokrovsk, maybe 10 to 20% of Pokrovsk, something in the middle there, is occupied. But the majority of Pokrovsk is not confirmed as occupied, but anywhere you see the yellow here, which counts as the gray zone, is areas where Russian soldiers have been documented. That doesn't mean that Russian soldiers still hold that position. It doesn't mean that Russian soldiers will continue to hold that position if they hold it now, but it does mean that Russian soldiers have been spotted there, and therefore Ukrainian forces hardly contesting, holding it strong. That is not guaranteed. And as we can see, Ukrainian drone attacks in the city are picking up. The 68th, who I spent a lot of time in Pokrovsk with. These drone teams here are the drone teams that I spent most of my time in Pokrovsk with. They are extremely active, bombing anywhere that they find the Russians to be when they hide in the little residential homes throughout Pokrovsk. And it's been costing the Russians quite a bit as they've moved 250, 300, 350, 400 Russian soldiers into Pokrovsk city and have spread them out over the urban buildings, like the apartment buildings, as well as the more suburban homes on the outskirts. As they have gone in to take it over, drones have come right behind them to smash those homes and both delay the Russian advance, but also make the Russian advance costly. The Ukrainians do not want to just pull out with no fight and just hand over Pokrovsk to the Russians. They want it to not only take a long time, as in, we were talking last year, and we're releasing the Pokrovsk documentary tomorrow, and so you can listen to this testimony directly from the soldiers themselves that they're talking about. Last year, the Russians are talking about taking Pokrovsk by winter. I don't really know if that's going to happen. I don't think it is, but, they're pushing for it. So they were talking about taking it by winter. Now we're in 2025's winter, and we're still talking about the Russians fighting in Pokrovsk, taking territory around Pokrovsk. We're not talking about, hey, they've taken half of Konstantinivka, or if they've moved into Kramatorsk or Sloviansk. We're still talking about largely right now in the headlines, Pokrovsk and its twin city, Mirorod. So the time is one thing, but they also want it to be expensive. They want to make sure that if they do take over Pokrovsk, that it's not going to be able to serve as the logistical hub that originally made it so strategically valuable for the Russians and why they were going to take it. Again, if you watch tomorrow's documentary on Dylan Burns TV, remember to hit the notification bell so that you get notified right when it comes out tomorrow morning, Eastern Standard Time, tomorrow early afternoon, Ukraine time. You can listen to these guys not only talk about the time, but the casualties that this cost, and if the Russians, and not only the casualties, but the usefulness of it as a logistical hub, and the concerns they had that they didn't take the time to blow up the train, to blow up the trails that the Russians could use to support the Russian army logistically. A lot of time has happened since then. Those things have since been blown up. And so Pokrovsk being that logistical hub, that logistical node, is not really possible anymore. They can use it as a launching point Pokrovsk has, an urban center that the Russians can hide in. It's another city in their moves to conquer the Donetsk region. Like, these are all things as to why the Russians would want to take it. But when people talked about the logistical support node, I was brought on the BBC today to talk about Pokrovsk. They reached out to me. They emailed me like, "Can you come on? We need people to talk about Pokrovsk. You've been on the ground." Like, okay, sure. And I go on Pokrovsk. I go on the show to talk about Pokrovsk, and they're still talking about the idea of Pokrovsk being used as a logistical node. I don't know if it's just that these main outlets haven't updated their coverage in the last year, or if they're just trying to, for the people who haven't checked in the last year, they're trying to update people about what's going on. But it's just the roads have been smashed to hell. The train station has been burnt and destroyed to hell. The Ukrainians were not going to hand over Pokrovsk unless the situation deteriorated so rapidly they had no choice but we need to drive in the next hour or die, which is not what has happened. The logistical node factor when it comes to Pokrovsk has essentially been eliminated. But I would say the biggest developments for Pokrovsk are twofold. One is still up in the air, the other isn't. The first one, and this is a grim update, is that the Russians have been able to make their way into northern Pokrovsk. You can see here up into the northern suburbs of Pokrovsk, it is now marked as gray zone, not Russian controlled. Again, if it's yellow here, it's a gray zone. But the reason it's gray zone is because the Ukrainian 68th Mechanized Brigade, their drone teams, were taking out Russians who had holed up in a house at the northernmost part. Now, look, it could have easily been that once they entered the city, once they made the charge across or ran from tree line to get into Pokrovsk, that they were given orders to go up to the most northernmost point and hold in order to make it easier for the Russians to come and try to take it later. It could not necessarily be it could be, it's not an indication that the Russians are swarming all over this part of northern Pokrovsk. It could be an indication that the Russians are trying to move into this northern part of Pokrovsk to undermine Ukrainian logistics, get behind Ukrainian positions, and quickly, as fast as possible, consume the city of Pokrovsk. What the current Russian objective is to take, according to reports, Putin has ordered Russian commanders to take Pokrovsk by mid-November. Now in Ukraine, it is November 1st. Rest of the world, Halloween, October 31st. But it is now November, and they are fighting on the streets of Pokrovsk. So in comparison to what they originally wanted to do, take Pokrovsk last winter, they're a little late. When it comes to this new formatted, schedule for when they want to take Pokrovsk, the Russians could possibly be assumed to be on schedule, depending upon the idea that in the next 15 days, Ukraine will have completely withdrawn. Now, if the Ukrainians want to completely withdraw, they need to get the forces out of a few areas. Number one, they need to get the forces out from here. They need to get them from here. They need to get them from Novopilka, and they need to get whatever remaining forces reside in Murderod. Or if any remaining forces reside in any of this gray zone as well, which I would imagine would be quite difficult at this point. But all of these areas, I mean, if you're trying to move from here back into Pokrovsk itself, we're talking about a 7-kilometer trek. A 7-kilometer trek that can only be done on foot. Trying to get the Ukrainians outside of, they're going to have to go tree line to tree line. They're going to have to go from this tree line, run across the field, this tree line to this tree line, run up this. And mind you, the Russians are well aware that they're going to have to do this. And so they have mortar teams, they have artillery teams ready to aim for them. They have drone teams, FPV teams patrolling these tree lines. And you want to know what else they have? They're dropping mines in the tree lines. Anti-infantry mines, so that the Ukrainians, even if they can get to these tree lines and start this long track, they might end up stepping on one of these mines anyway. So it's going to be an extremely difficult situation. It could be faster, of course, to just drive a car down there, jump in the car, and drive out. But that quick burst across these farm fields, that 7-kilometer drive, is going to be the most dangerous 7 kilometers for anyone going that route. And then once they get up here, it's not over. They then have to find a way to move from inside Pokrovsk to outside Pokrovsk. And getting through this gap where the Russians know that Ukrainian forces are moving in and out of, they have a ton of FPVs patrolling this, they have night bombers patrolling this, and of course, they have artillery and mortars firing upon these positions, as well as constant infantry pressure from the northernmost point and the southernmost point, trying to make it so they can not only encircle Pokrovsk, but squeeze the route out. Because even if you can't encircle Pokrovsk, even if the Ukrainians at the last second redeploy special operators to stop the encirclement of Pokrovsk by helicopter or otherwise, then they can at least apply pressure that can make the withdrawal from Pokrovsk more painful, because the Russian strategy now is to grind down the Ukrainian armed forces until they can no longer hold against the pressure. And to do that, you need to bring upon them some pretty heavy casualties. Because if the Ukrainians are able to fully withdraw and then redeploy their defensive positions outside of Konstantinivka, outside of Limon, outside of Siversk, outside of Slovyansk and Kramatorsk, well, they do not want those battles to be as painful as the Ukrainians plan it to be for them. And by the way, when I'm talking about the Ukrainians using special operation forces to keep the gap open, the reason I'm mentioning that is because we do have footage that has gotten published of special operators doing this exact thing. Here is Ukrainian military intelligence, GURS, one of their helicopters conducting a daring raid. I don't know if you would call it raid. Oliver Carroll calls it a counteroffensive, but they've landed near the exit of Pokrovsk with the stated objective, the stated goal to be to open up the lines, the logistical lines out of Pokrovsk, to make it so that it's easier to bring supplies into Pokrovsk for those holding the line for however many days that they're going to be holding the line, be that a week, be it 2 weeks, and for the inevitable. And that's, at this point, that's how we have to talk about this. We have to talk about this frankly. The inevitable withdrawal from Pokrovsk as a long, drawn-out Bakhmut-style infantry slugfest in Pokrovsk City will give the Ukrainians diminishing returns. Now, as the Russians like get into a village house for the first time and they're not entrenched and a drone flies in and blows it up, or the Ukrainians have entrenched positions that the Russians have to throw themselves again against apartment blocks, or they have to throw themselves against booby traps, mines placed in the basements of buildings. At this point, it might not be diminishing returns, but in a few weeks and a month, that situation will be different. And so at the moment, it seems that the Ukrainians are more than willing to dedicate whatever resources at their disposal to make sure that the withdrawal from Pokrovsk goes swimmingly, as many are talking about the Ukrainian armed forces taking too long to make the decision to withdraw from the city, wanting it to be a more organized fashion, not holding the ground until you're forced to withdraw or be encircled, of which, yes, increases the cost on the attacker, but also increase the cost on the defender who needs to move on to Konstantinivka, Siversk, Limon, Kramatorsk, Slovyansk, and these other defensible positions in the Donetsk region that the Russians have clearly stated that they are going to keep fighting until they take, unless they are made to otherwise, i.e. stopped. And the reason why I think the Ukrainians are willing to put forward probably any resources they can at this point is the fact that the military helicopter you're looking at on screen right now is a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter. Every single one of these are serving with Ukrainian military intelligence. There are only 3 of these helicopters in the entirety of the Ukrainian armed services. So if this helicopter is operating, especially if it's operating at a crucial point like this, flying very daringly, this close to the contact line, they've got some killers in this field. Every one of these soldiers, I would make the bet, if this report is true and this footage is
Burns is an immoral, morally corrupt, bankrupt man.
Which we cannot just assume that how the way that the footage is described in its release is necessarily true. Psychological operations can't happen. But if it is true, as I believe it to be, These are Ukrainian special operators, i.e., these are Ukrainian special forces, probably some of the best in the country. Now, Ukrainian special forces and the skills that they developed, these are most utilized in things like sabotage operations, going behind you Russian lines, blowing up their logistics, returning to Ukrainian lines, doing the things that Mr. Conscriptovich can't just do on a random Sunday. These special tasks are where they're best utilized. So I do get nervous when we throw such great operators. And yes, compared to some other units, these people are going to hold like steel. They're going to fight as hard as possible. They're going to, they're going to have good skills to pay the bills. But it also makes me question exactly, what situation the force is in if they feel that they have to make a move like this. But more importantly, is this the best way to utilize Ukrainian special operators? If the risk of encirclement for Ukrainian forces or the risk of heightened casualties in the withdrawal process is so significant, then I would say, okay, this is fair. I would understand the call. And considering the way that people are talking about it, I would not put that possibility off. It's good to secure your routes out. And we talked about it on the show that if the Ukrainian armed forces wants to make it secure for the forces in all of the positions, including the positions down south here, to withdraw, they're going to have to dedicate more forces to the area in the short term before withdrawing them all in the long term, because they need people to hold the line while people run away from it. It's as simple as that. If you look at the withdrawal process from Avdiivka, many people in the south, to the south of Avdiivka, did not get to withdraw. They did not get the withdrawal because the route out was just too dangerous, and they held and they held and they held, and then they died there. Some of the hardest, best fighters in the Avdiivka defense died, not due to the fact that they weren't, they had already previously been killed, but no, there wasn't the pathway out for them. And so that's where they died. And the Ukrainian armed forces, I'm sure, wants to avoid that when they're already having so many manpower problems at the moment. I mean, the always glaring, the always relevant elephant in the room. I will say, though, the Ukrainian forces really are cutting it close. If you look at the gap here between lines, between gray zones, I mean, we're talking 6 kilometers. Mind you, just because it's a gray zone doesn't mean the Russians solidly control that. It could be more likely something along 7.5 to 8 kilometers. Definitely, since the Ukrainians are still fighting over Rodonsky, which the Russians want to take in order to complete that encirclement. But it's a very small gap. Very small gap. Military intelligence, GUR is ran by Budanov. Yes, that's true. Also, I saw a rumor, this is just rumor, that Budanov is actually in the area to help personally lead a lot of the operations in Pokrovsk. That's rumor, though. I haven't seen videos, I haven't seen pictures, and people can put out a press release. Until I see it, I will not believe it. Many things have been said about this war. Many things. By the way, if you're curious as to exactly where these Ukrainian special operators deployed, right there on the left northern side of Pokrovsk, right at the exit, that's where the helicopter dropped them off. Talk about an entrance. We've got some more footage from the Pokrovsk axis that I did want to show. So here is 3 clips that I think help really define how the fighting around Pokrovsk is at this point. Okay. The first would be what the Ukrainians are doing to the advancing Russians. Drone attack, drone attack, drone attack. For every step forward the Russians make, they have to dodge 1 or 2 Ukrainian drones, which are swarming them. It is delaying Russian operations. It is suppressing Russian operations. And when Russians finally get into the city, charge into the city, and then, hey, look, I'm hiding. Oh, I'm hiding in this building now. I've been able to make it into Pokrovsk. Before you know it, there's an FPV flying through the window just like this, making itself known. And clips like this from the 68th, from the 7th Air Assault Corps, and from many, many other units have released a lot of footage over the last week. These are night bombers. I believe those are 82 millimeters. A lot of men do this. I've seen a lot of clips of Russian soldiers hiding under the burnt out remains of those who came before them in these vehicles. Because on Konstantinivka, on that axis, I swear to you, every 50 feet to 100, you will see a burnt out vehicle in the route into that city. Which I will say, a little disconcerting when you're like, oh, that looks like our car. Oh, that looks like our car too. Oh, that looks like our car as well. You know, that's it's a little disconcerting. But when you think about it, if there's burnout vehicles every 50 meters, that could be cover if you're really willing to crawl from vehicle to vehicle. A lot of times, though, these are just people hiding under their vehicle. They don't know what to do. You know, those wars, they bit off way too much, you know, way more than they could chew. And that's just where they're hiding. But also, like, if there's a literal trail of burnt out vehicles to the enemy position, yeah, I guess you could use it. That's the entrance to Pokrovsk City. So we're going to end it here because in this clip you can see a corpse clearly, and I want to abide by Twitch TOS. I would like to keep my job, please. But this footage really well describes the fighting in Pokrovsk because on the Ukrainian side, drones are carrying so much weight, they're causing so much damage, and of course they suppress Russian action. If you hear that buzzing above your head, you're going to get down and you're not going to move a lot of the time. Some of the time they charge forward anyway. But those are many of the instances where they will never be able to charge forward again. And so when I talk about Ukrainian defenses, this is a really big part of it. Another piece of footage that I think well describes the situation in Pokrovsk is this clip of a wounded soldier being evacuated by the 38th Separate Marine Brigade, which is also operating in the Pokrovsk direction. You can see he's being brought out by a trolley.
Вот так вот достается 300 с позиции, когда нету логистики. Вот так вот вытащить побратима с позиции.
So, driving in and out of Pokrovsk right now, a vehicle is a big target. You can see the vehicle, it brings attention to itself, and while it's faster and so you can be in and out quicker, and that's the main advantage, it also drags the attention of any drone that has cameras in the area. And considering how many drones are in the sky and how much battlefield transparency there is, the most in human history, that can be a real risk for you, especially with 1/3 of all offensive action happening on just this small section of the front between Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka. That's going to be a lot of drone activity. That's going to be a lot of eyes. And so that's going to be a lot of attention. And there are not teams along the route to help shoot them down. In Konstantinivka, there are anti-drone teams along popular routes into the city with shotguns and rifles that await drones to enter their purview so they can let them have it. That is not really feasible right now on the Pokrovsk axis. That's not feasible. That's not to say people aren't shooting down drones. There's just not a bunch of people lining the pathways in. The drone nets that have been put up leading into Pokrovsk have largely been smashed by artillery and mortars, meaning that yes, you can still use it, but those drone nets, the few that are still standing, have like 10%, like they cover like 10% of what they used to cover, and they never even covered the entire route to begin with. Looks like a wedding veil that has been torn through. Okay, you had an interesting wedding night. So a lot of these supply drops in and out of the city are made by heavy bomber drones, and a lot of the supply drops and medical evacuations and such and rotations, for the rotations that are happening right now, which you wouldn't just call a withdrawal, they're being made on foot like this through tree lines, through the cover of the leaves that are still there, but will not be there for long. You can see those are yellow leaves. We are well into fall. We are now entering November. By the end of this month, these trees will be bare. In fact, some of them already are. So if you want to use that cover to withdraw, this is the month to do it. December is not the month to do it. The last piece of footage that I want to show you is this.
Помаленьку вирішили зробити міні-зачистку в себе в безпеці. Натрапили на стежку, скажем.
I don't know why it would not let me pause it. But this is a clip from a drone team. This is a drone team attached to the 63rd Brigade, the 63rd Mechanized Brigade. And these guys were moving to their position so they can operate their drones and continue to produce more of the clips that we were just watching earlier. Now, the way that it's supposed to work, and I've embedded with more drone teams than anything else, nearing a dozen drone teams, nearly half a dozen night bomber teams, a lot of drones, right? That's not to talk about even the recon drones or the other drones we have organized for this year. So, Lancet drones, ground drones, all the different types of drone innovation. But FPV drones, I've filmed the most with. But in order to operate those drones, you need to be relatively close to the front, which they are, but not on the contact line. Meaning you're on the front as in you're in the range of artillery, you're in the range of other drones, you're in the range of mortars, you're in the range of grad rocket fire, of course, any sort of airstrike, but you're still kilometers, miles, for the Yankoids, away from the front line. 3, 4, 5 miles, 3 or 4 kilometers, something along those lines. Depends on the local geography, depends on whether or not you're going to be in an urban center or in a tree line, etc. Well, the way it's supposed to work is that they are separated by infantry from the enemy infantry. And so Ukrainian infantry holds the line, and then Ukrainian artillery and drone teams support the line. But due to the fact that Pokrovsk is in large part a gray zone now, getting to and from the position can be a problem. And this is not just a problem in Pokrovsk, but I have heard reports, credible reports, of UAV teams, drone teams operating in direct firefights with Russian soldiers in Pokrovsk. Which, of course, when I'm with these teams, they have rifles. They have to be trained on small arms fire. They can defend themselves, but they are best trained and best utilized at a distance with drones. And the fact that they were put in that position does kind of define where we are right now in the battle. Here's the footage of this drone team with the 63rd Organized Mechanized Brigade trying to get to their position and then stumbling upon Russians they then have to take as prisoners of war.
Помаленьку вирішили зробити міні-зачистку в себе в тилу, щоб бути впевненим в своїй безпеці.
So we decided to do a little bit of clearing of our rear lines to be sure of our
Натрапили на
safety.
стежку, скажем
We found
так.
some kind of
Ну, я
path.
ж волиняка, я ж,
But I'm from
можна
Volyn. You
сказати,
could say I was born in the forest. For those of you who don't know where Volyn is one of the most westernmost Ukrainian regions. It's you're going past the Carpathians, and you are as westward as you can be.
в лісі родився.
I was born in
Ніяка
the
тваринка
forest.
так
No
траву не
animal
буде
will press
приминати.
down the grass like this.
Обережно підійшли, виявили.
We found it.
Ну, укриття
A
стоїть
shelter,
там
100%.
підар.
Давай
There's
виходь
a-
сюди, сюди вилазь.
F slur.
Руки
Come out.
вверх.
With your hands up.
Я сказав, сюди
Hands up. Come out here.
Він почав здаватися, ну що.
Started to surrender.
Сюди,
Well,
йди. На
come
відкриту
here.
місцевість.
Come here to the open
Вставай на
area.
коліна,
Get on
лягай.
your knees. Lie down.
Лягай.
Lie down.
Стій так.
Stand
Риба,
like
ти
this.
поняв, це отой підар, який...
Fish, do you understand? It's an F slur.
Руки вверх.
Who was on the air. So what they're saying is that they heard this person on radio communications. So this is not their first time hearing about this person. Call sign Fish.
виходив.
Руки вверх тримай.
Keep your hands up.
Я не стріляв ні в
I didn't shoot
Все добре,
anyone.
будеш жити.
Everything's
Я
fine. You'll
обіцяю,
live.
документи
I
свої
promise.
сюди
Throw your
Нет,
documents
я
on the
зэк.
floor. I
Зэк?
don't have any. I'm an ex-convict.
Він був
Ex-con.
зв'язківцем.
He was a
Дві
liaison
рації,
officer.
два телефони,
Two radios,
документи.
two phones,
Скоріше всього, що був
documents.
старший
Most likely he was
групи.
the leader of the group.
Коли останній раз
When was
радійку
the last
виходив?
time you contacted the radio?
Сьогодні з утра.
This morning.
Я нічого, я жрать.
Nothing. I was waiting for food.
Я не хавав.
I haven't eaten in 6 days.
А чого я тебе розумію?
Why do I
ти мене
understand
ні?
you, but you don't understand me?
Ага.
I don't understand, yeah.
Володь,
Blow,
все, давай
yeah.
запаковуй.
That's it. Let's pack them up.
Запаковуй все і
Pack them
ведемо
up and let's
звідси.
get out of here.
Дали покурити, все
We
геть,
let him
відношення
smoke.
до його
Everything I
було,
would say or
я б сказав,
attitudes
на
towards
вищому рівні.
him was at the highest level.
Зібрали всі його
We gathered
речі,
all of his belongings,
повністю
absolutely everything.
всю
All
апаратуру,
his
всю техніку.
equipment, his gadgets.
Будеш послушним
You will
зараз,
be
водичку
obedient and drink
поп'єш.
water.
Нехай каску вдягає.
Let
теж,
him
ну,
wear a
пане,
helmet so he doesn't
схоже.
look like a prisoner.
Іди.
The reason, one of the reasons why they might make him wear a helmet, it's not only, of course, like safety, but there have been multiple instances in recent days where surrendering Russians have been blown up by their own side after it was made clear to them that that is what they were doing. And they have sent FPVs and literally hit them in the back, exploding them in half. So it could be that by having Russian prisoners, you actually become a bigger target, not a lesser target.
Ти сюди прийшов.
Go. You've come this far. Damn. Okay, I gotta say, that's not a pleasant walk, is it? That's not a walk I would want to take. My goodness. Yeah, that's one way to get a man to move forward. Look at that. Just place it right at the base of the back of his neck. My goodness.
Сюди прийшов.
Go. You've come this
то
far.
дійдеш ще
You might as well
50
go another
метрів.
50 meters. If you guys are curious as to why earlier he said, why is it that we can understand you and you can't understand us? And the Russian said, yeah, I can't. The dude is from Volyn. He is a Ukrainian from Western Ukraine who is speaking in Ukrainian. There have been multiple occasions in this war where, though the Russians say that Ukrainian is just a subsect of Russian, it's just a dialect of Russian, there have been many instances where Ukrainians will speak Russian, knowing that the Russians can understand them, knowing that they can say it in a way that sounds like they're Russian, but the Russians cannot do the same thing with Ukrainian. The Ukrainian has so many similarities with Polish that there have been many times on the front line where you hear Russian soldiers say, what are they doing? Are those guys speaking Polish? They must be NATO mercenaries, because they can't understand the Ukrainian. And so it was a point being made by the soldier about the difference between the two peoples. While the Russian government, of course, claims that there is no difference between. Very interesting.